On February 24, 1978, 5 men drove to a basketball game and never came home. Their car was found 3 days later, 70 miles in the wrong direction, abandoned on a mountain road in freezing temperatures, with the engine running, windows down, and enough gas in the tank to keep them warm all night. 4 months later, when the snow melted, searchers found their bodies scattered across the wilderness. One man had survived for 8 to 13 weeks, alone in a fully stocked trailer, surrounded by food, propane for heat, and survival supplies. He never touched any of it. He froze and starved to death instead. I'm a forensic psychologist, and I've spent the last 2 years trying to understand why. What I discovered suggests this wasn't about getting lost. This was about something far stranger happening to 5 vulnerable minds on a dark mountain road that night. The evidence in this case contradicts every logical explanation we've tried to apply to it for 47 years. The Yuba County 5 case has been called America's Diatloav Pass, but that comparison misses the point entirely. This wasn't about experienced hikers fleeing their tent in terror. This was about 5 intellectually disabled men making a series of decisions so inexplicable that they can only be understood through the lens of cognitive vulnerability, group psychology under extreme stress, and what I've come to recognize as collective decision-making collapse. Let me start with who these men were, because understanding their psychology is essential to understanding what happened. Jack Madruga, aged 30, was the most independent of the group. He was an Army veteran, a skilled mechanic who worked at a local market. He'd recently bought his own car, a 1969 Mercury Montego, and took enormous pride in maintaining it. His mother said he treated that car better than anything he'd ever owned. Jack had mild intellectual disability, but functioned well in structured environments. He was responsible, cautious, and protective of his friends. William Sterling, age 29, had served in the Army alongside Jack. He was described as quiet, a follower rather than a leader, someone who looked to Jack for guidance in unfamiliar situations. He lived with his mother and worked part-time jobs. His family said he'd never done anything unpredictable in his life. He followed routines. He trusted Jack completely. Ted Weer, age 32, had the most significant intellectual disability of the group. He'd spent time in a psychiatric facility as a teenager and was on antipsychotic medication. He was described as childlike, gentle, easily frightened. He became anxious in unfamiliar situations and needed significant support in daily living. He lived in a group home, and his mother visited him regularly. He loved basketball, and it was one of the few activities where he showed genuine joy and engagement. Jack Huitt, age 24, was described as higher functioning than the others. He was employed, lived relatively independently with his parents, and served as something of a social organizer for the group. He had intellectual disability, but compensated with strong social skills and enthusiasm. He was excited about things, talkative, optimistic. Friends said he was always planning the next activity, the next outing. Gary Mathias, age 25, was the wild card in this group, and understanding his role is crucial to any psychological analysis of what happened. Gary didn't have intellectual disability. He had paranoid schizophrenia. He'd served in the Army, been honorably discharged, and was on psychotropic medication that controlled his symptoms when he took it regularly. When he didn't take it, he experienced paranoid delusions, auditory hallucinations, and difficulty distinguishing reality from psychotic ideation. His family said he'd been doing well recently, attending his therapy appointments, taking his medication, staying stable. But Gary's presence in this group meant that if something happened to trigger his paranoia that night, he might have had the force of personality to convince the others that his delusions were real. These 5 men were part of a local program called Gateway Projects, which provided activities and support for people with developmental and psychiatric disabilities. They'd formed a basketball team and were intensely proud of it. On February 24th, they had a game in Chico, California, about 50 miles from Yuba City, where most of them lived. After the game, which they won, they were planning to return home. The next day, they had another game, a tournament they'd been looking forward to for weeks. Every single family member I've reviewed in case files said the same thing. These men would never have missed that tournament voluntarily. Basketball was the center of their social world. Missing it would have been unthinkable. They left the game around 10 p.m. They were seen at a small market in Chico buying snacks and drinks. The clerk remembered them because they were happy, celebrating their win, talking about the tournament the next day. They got back in Jack's Mercury and headed toward home. That's the last confirmed sighting of them alive as a group. What happened in the next few hours has never been adequately explained. 3 days later, on February 28th, a Forest Service employee found Jack's Mercury on a mountain road near Rogers Cow Camp in the Plumas National Forest. The location was 70 miles from where they should have been, 50 miles in the completely wrong direction from their route home. The car was on an unfamiliar, unmaintained mountain road that local residents said out-of-towners would never know about. It was a road used by loggers and hunters who knew the area well, not by people passing through. Here's what makes the car's condition psychologically significant. The engine was off, but the keys were still in the ignition. The windows were down despite freezing temperatures. The gas tank was over a quarter full, enough to run the heater for hours. The car showed no mechanical problems. When investigators later tried to start it, it started immediately. There was no reason for them to have abandoned a functioning vehicle in the middle of nowhere in February, but they did. Inside the car, investigators found nothing unusual, no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of violence. The men's belongings were there, personal items suggesting they'd intended to return. Outside the car, they found something stranger, a set of tire tracks indicating the Mercury had been driven farther up the mountain road, then backed down to where it was found. Someone had driven the car up the road, realized it was impassable or led nowhere useful, then backed it carefully down to this spot. That suggests intention, control, decision-making, not panic, not fleeing from immediate danger. But there was other evidence at the scene that contradicts controlled decision-making. Footprints in the snow showed the 5 men had left the car and walked up the road, deeper into the wilderness, away from civilization. The prints showed they were together initially, walking in a group, but the prints suggested strange behavior. Some footprints showed hesitation, circling back, starting in one direction, then changing. Not the purposeful stride of people who knew where they were going, but the wandering tracks of confusion or indecision. The Forest Service employee who found the car immediately called authorities, and a search began. But the area was vast, the weather was terrible, and the snow was deep. For weeks, helicopters and search teams found nothing. Then, on June 4th, nearly 4 months after the disappearance, hikers discovered a small camp in the forest, about 19 miles from where the car was found. At this camp, they found a makeshift shelter built from branches and material scavenged from the forest. Inside the shelter was Ted Weir's body. The condition of Ted's body is what makes this case psychologically inexplicable. He was lying in a position suggesting he'd been trying to stay warm, curled in blankets. He'd lost between 80 and 100 pounds since his disappearance. The medical examiner determined he'd survived for 8 to 13 weeks after abandoning the car, slowly starving and freezing. He had frostbite on his feet, so severe that his toes had essentially decomposed while he was still alive. But here's what makes no sense. Ted's body was found in a Forest Service trailer that contained a full stock of food, canned goods, freeze-dried meals, enough to feed multiple people for months. There was propane for heat and cooking. There were blankets beyond what he was using. The trailer had everything Ted needed to survive comfortably until spring thaw. But Ted didn't use any of it. The food was untouched. The propane tanks were full. He'd opened some of the cabinets. Evidence showed he'd looked at the supplies, but he never consumed them. Instead, he'd eaten what investigators determined was a candy bar wrapper found near his body, and possibly small amounts of food he'd brought with him. Then he'd slowly starved to death while surrounded by food. As a psychologist, I need to emphasize what this tells us about Ted's mental state. He wasn't unconscious. He wasn't immobilized initially. He'd built a shelter, which requires planning and physical capability. He'd arranged himself in the blankets strategically to preserve warmth. He knew he was cold and hungry, and he took some actions to address those needs. But he couldn't take the simple action of opening a can of food that was within arm's reach. This suggests a profound cognitive rigidity or a psychological barrier so strong it overrode survival instinct. One theory is that Ted was following a rule. People with intellectual disabilities, especially those who've lived in institutional settings, sometimes develop rigid rule-following behavior. If Ted had been taught not to take things that didn't belong to him, he might have seen the food as not his to take, even when dying. But that theory falls apart under scrutiny. Ted had opened cabinets. He'd looked at the food. The trailer showed signs of habitation, suggesting he'd been living there for weeks. At some point during 8 to 13 weeks of starvation, survival instinct should have overridden any social rule about not taking others' property, unless something else was preventing him. The other bodies were found over the following weeks. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found together about 11.5 miles from the car, their bodies partially consumed by animals. They'd died of hypothermia and starvation, but their positioning suggested they'd been traveling together, perhaps trying to find help or find their way back. Jack Huitt's body was found near them, also showing signs of hypothermia and starvation. The medical examiner determined they'd died within days of abandoning the car, unlike Ted, who'd survived for months. Gary Mathias was never found. Not his body, not any trace of him beyond those initial footprints leaving the car. 47 years later, Gary Mathias remains missing, and his absence is the key to every psychological theory about what happened that night. Let me walk you through the timeline and the psychological factors that might explain this. The men left the basketball game around 10 p.m., happy and celebrating. They stopped for snacks. They got in the car heading home. Somewhere between Chico and Yuba City, something happened that caused them to drive 70 miles in the wrong direction, up a mountain road they had no reason to know about, and abandon a functioning car in the middle of winter. The first theory law enforcement proposed was that they saw something that scared them and fled, but this theory has problems. If they were fleeing immediate danger, why did they carefully back the car down the mountain road? Why did they turn off the engine and take the keys? Why did their footprints show hesitation and confusion rather than panicked running? And why would all 5 men agree to flee on foot into a frozen wilderness rather than driving away in the car they came in?
The story doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. The next part will haunt you. Subscribe to Zorivox Chronicles. Share this with someone who works with vulnerable populations. Because the next time 5 people with cognitive disabilities get in a car together, I want the people around them to understand what can go wrong and how to prevent it. I'll see you in the next episode.